must be skeptical of absolutely everything. Above all, this is a war of propaganda.
Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
We only need to use the word faith when there isn't any evidence.
I presume you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that?
Yes, plenty of evidence. I
strongly resist the idea that archaeology is a science. These days, academics are driven by the need to publish research papers.
Now, of course I am minimising my tax, and if anybody in this country doesn't minimise their tax, they want their heads ripped. Because as a government, I can tell you, you're not spending it that well that we should be donating extra.
The easy answer is this. If we continue to send our children to Caesar for their education, we need to stop being surprised when they come home as Romans.
Welcome to another session of Fringe Frequencies, another episode. I'm Jason, and this is Codes.
Codes. He has different names for me.
Lots of different names.
Quite bro-friendly, but yeah.
This evening we are proud to have some old friends of mine, new friends of Cody's, all the way from New Zealand. Aotearoa, as is frequently called now, since I've been away from New Zealand for such a long time. A lot has changed. You wouldn't recognise it. I certainly am starting not to. But anyway, beside the point. So we have Caleb Kloeg and we have Victoria Sala on this evening to discuss their experience in New Zealand, opening up a business at pretty well the dawn of the COVID sessions, the struggles they faced, the issues around, I believe it's the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Food. Caleb?
It's I don't know, they keep changing it, but it's the health, and I think it was like a special sort of legislation they put through with the health and safety
and WorkSafe.
And WorkSafe was essentially the agent that carried out
WorkSafe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
the Ministry of Truth.
Ministry of Truth. I believe there is a Ministry of Truth coming. So thank you guys for coming on this evening. And so I guess to start it off, are we talking 2020 or 21 when you I believe it was 2020 when you opened your business, which is Saint Sebastian's in Masterton in New Zealand. Was it 2020 you opened it up? Could you just share a little bit about your story? I guess from the beginning, having this passion for food, what got you into it, and obviously starting that up, and obviously just I guess at the dawn, and then we can sort of discuss sort of what eventuated from there with lockdowns and
yeah, of course. We opened beginning of December 2019, and the reason for opening was essentially to bring a new way of a new experience and a new way of dining in Masterton. We were the venue that we were at is an old Masonic lodge, ironically enough.
I remember it, yeah. We had some good band stuff in there actually back in the day.
Yeah. Incredible building, and it was it'd been vacant for about 3.5 years, and I was sort of coming back and forth throughout my sort of world travels, and when I was living in Wellington, and I decided to give the real estate agent a call and just to see what was inside. I was just more curious to see what was inside than anything. Kind of had this idea of starting a restaurant, and that's pretty much how it all kind of, long story short, met a guy that was wanting to buy it that needed a tenant, and we got talking. He was a property developer in Masterton, and then we just worked together, and he ended up being my business investor as well. Well, not really investor. Well, he did invest, but without, I guess, like any share or anything like that. So I guess an angel investor. And we kickstarted off. We redecorated the whole place, repainted it, everything, built a kitchen in the middle of the restaurant. So it was all open kitchen. So
it's a beautiful place.
That a place that you'd very likely see in like Auckland, Wellington, even like Melbourne. And we wanted to bring that to Masterton and give it a go of doing, fine food and good wine and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Man, I wish you'd told me the name of the restaurant. I would have looked this up.
Saint Sebastian says that's your middle name, Sebastian.
Yeah.
From what I remember. Yeah.
So it was you wanted to do fine dining? Did you want to do like French or Italian, or did you want to do fusion? Like what was the did you have a particular vision for the restaurant or?
Yeah, so at the start, I guess, being a sort of a keen fisherman and a keen diver, and living in Masterton, where I knew there was a lot of people fishing around our coast, and just initially was sort of stumped why there wasn't more places in sort of Masterton, Greytown, and Martinborough doing, utilizing a resource that was so close, and then realizing that most of it got shipped to Wellington and then shipped back over here if they were to use it anyway. So at that time, it was essentially trying to figure out a way how we can, utilize as much sort of local produce, and that sort of stemmed through into, people growing, because we grow a lot over here and we produce good sort of sheep and beef as well. And just trying to reduce the sort of footprint of travel, and trying to use as much local and seasonal produce as we can, and give it to the people, and not so much fine dining. It is and it isn't. We kind of labeled it casual fine dining.
Yep.
So it's like, fine dining without all the pretentious stuff around it.
Yeah. Oh, I love all the pretentious stuff. No, I was joking.
So it was December 2019. You've. Is this when the restaurant opened, or is this when you purchased the building and started renovating?
No, so I didn't purchase it, but the building was purchased in about March 2019. Between March and December was essentially renovating and then getting it up to where it is now, and
And were you like an avid cook? Like, were you trained? Was there a desire to just start cooking out of nowhere, or because you mentioned you were a fisherman, and you had a lot of experience with
recreational fisherman.
Yeah. Okay.
Diver. Yeah.
Yep.
My parents. I was brought up, I guess, in hospitality. My parents own a very successful bakery cafe in Masterton as well. So does my brother, just out of Masterton. So, when I decided to open up the restaurant, kind of had the joke around going, I was like, if you're hungry in the Wairarapa, just come see us.
Come see a Kloeg.
Yeah. But initially I didn't want to. I went to uni, I did interior architecture, tried to stem away from my calling, I guess. But I mean, I was good at it, so it kind of made it easy in a way. Not real, I mean, I kind of knew what I was doing, and I guess with the restaurant, very experimental, and I guess a little bit probably out of naivety, and a little bit, of just kind of playing things as it comes and hoping for the best. Thought it would be a great idea to open up a
best place to start, because you sometimes don't know the storm coming.
Looking back. Oh, sorry, Cav. I don't usually interrupt, but I'm very interested in the story. Looking back, do you think you could have reasonably been aware of the risks, or did you look at it like, oh, this is a big venture, this is quite risky for me to do this, or were you fairly confident and comfortable, like this could be a very successful business?
Yeah, I guess there was a lot of risks, but I was pretty convinced that it was going to work. I thought, I guess, in hindsight now, I thought, I had something good to give, and I thought people would want it, which some did, some didn't. And we're still in that educational process of, which is always, it's food, you're always, trying to create something new, and, that kind of stuff, which makes it exciting. But in hindsight, when we first, I look at some of the first menus that we had, and they were cool, but they were definitely like, even I look at them now, I'm like, whew, I mean,
like ambitious.
And that. Yeah.
So
I think about that. I guess, and once we're sort of 150 podcasts in, we'll look at back like the first and second one. Don't tell Eddie, but and we'll go, yeah, nah. So, yeah,
I'm
excited.
I'm excited, man. So sorry, I don't know. You probably did answer this, bro, but so the doors opened in December.
Opened on the 8th of December, I believe.
Yep.
We kicked off to a pretty good start. We had no idea had no idea really what we were doing. We were, pretty booked out when we first opened. And then I think it was probably a bit too out there for most people. So then
for Masterton.
Sort of after Christmas, people like booked all their Christmas functions with us because they're like, new restaurant in town. And then after sort of Christmas and stuff, we kind of things sort of to drop off more than I thought it would, and we're sort of scratching our heads why, and you're sort of looking back, and then you kind of realize that the past sort of, especially like the past sort of like month, 2 months, has just been like so crazy that you're having to really be able to sort of step back and see what works and what doesn't, and what makes sense and what doesn't, and so in all honesty, a part of COVID was a little bit of like it was a godsend for us in terms of being able to step back in the business and look at what's working and what's not, even in the first 3 months. And it kind of just made us reevaluate essentially how we can, because we knew at the start that doing the food that we're going to be doing was going to be a big push anyway, and sort of the experience and that kind of stuff. But it kind of just helped us sort of step back and reevaluate of essentially what can we do and focus on, and what our passion is of creating new food, and and sort of the experimental side of food, as well as still giving the people what they want. And so it's when we did the COVID, when sort of COVID hit and we're doing the we're allowed to do like takeaways and deliveries and that kind of stuff like that, we essentially did our take on fast food.
I remember that, yeah.
And so each night we did like Chinese, we did like sort of KFC, fried chicken, we did burgers, cool. That kind of stuff. And we realized that we make really, really good burgers. So now we got burgers on the menu.
Awesome.
So, yes.
So when you say we, so was it yourself and Victoria that undertook this venture, or was it you and a business entity? How many people were involved in the management and the ownership of the business?
Initially it was myself and a friend of mine who was the head chef, and we kind of ran it together. I offered him shares in the business, and that's a whole other story.
That's right.
But essentially, it was when I say we, I sort of talk about the whole team as well.
Is there a wider team around you too?
Yeah, and that's something we've been very blessed with and fortunate as well. Is we've always had like a really, really good team for the most part. And I guess growing up in a business, more like in a family business, and it wasn't until Vic and I have had chats and stuff, and she always says how sort of fortunate I am to have that opportunity to see the ins and outs of business, and when times are good, when times are tough, and any other place I worked at as well, like other restaurants, I would always kind of treat it as my own, well, not as, sort of as my own. And
you acted as if it was your own business, so that when you finally had your own, you're already in that mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I wanted to learn, like I want to know, what works and what doesn't. And, if, we're going to do like specials and stuff, I'd like go home and research it, then come back the next day. And I was like, sweet, I've got like a special. And, whereas it's that kind of, those types of people are harder to find, that kind of care and will go the extra mile, or, don't mind sticking around and stuff, a little bit longer and stuff like that. I mean, they're still around, but they're just...
they're a bit like needles in a haystack.
Well, they're prized.
Yeah.
I know.
They're prized in every industry, bro. In every industry, you find someone who's a hard worker, someone who cares about what they're doing. They'll do well in almost anything, And would you say it's, a common thing I hear is that the hospitality industry is actually very challenging. It's very challenging. Would you say that's true?
Yeah. I think in terms of like financials, it's a lot of effort for a small amount of profit, well, to an extent, most hospitalities businesses will probably run off between a 13 and 17% profit. So, and to get to essentially offer a service or offer an experience, it takes a lot, and especially with I guess like the cost of food fluctuating and generally fluctuating to the higher inflation, so, and you've got to determine how you can still offer stuff that's affordable without you still want the people to come in.
Yeah, that's right.
Spend, and
and have a good experience too.
Yeah. And so you need staff, and all of that kind of stuff, and then you've got to put time into training staff to give them the right tools and the right for them to be essentially comfortable to what they're doing. I mean, that's like in any industry and stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know, would you got anything to add?
I guess hospitality is like service.
Yeah.
It can be really rewarding, but it can also be quite like tiring. But it's nice. You have to hospo and people to be in it. Like, you ain't in it for the money.
Yeah, you did.
It can. But
it can give you, but
it's a passion thing.
Yeah, it's a huge passion thing, and that's why we're still doing it, because we love it.
Yeah. Usually the people that I've ever met in life who are really passionate about what they do, I mean, obviously it's still work to a degree, but the money usually follows them. Every single person who I've ever met in my life who is super passionate, like passionate to a fault about what they do, money follows behind them. And those are what I call the real successful people, because the sort of people that want to work with those sort of people because the passion oozes out of them, But I'll just fast forward a little bit. I'm not actually sure. We don't have to get into relationships and all that sort of stuff, but we go through to March. We've gone through sort of December, January. I think it was around April. April, February, there were rumors about this whole COVID thing coming in the world, and we get to sort of March and April. I can't remember when the New Zealand lockdown started. I can't remember if it was before or after. It's all a bit of a blur. But
yeah, when did you first notice trouble on the horizon?
Such a long time ago. Well, it seems like a long time ago now.
Yeah.
I think it was the same. I think it was about March. It would be March 2020.
I think it was, but yeah, that whole time was quite a blur.
Yeah. So I mean,
you recall your thoughts?
Luke and I went together at that stage, and I think when it sort of happened, because it happened so fast, right? It was like, go on with your daily things. You kind of hear about COVID overseas, it's sort of happening. And then next thing, it's just like we're locking down, in like 6 hours, or like 6 or 12 hours, I think it was.
Yeah, it was like a joke.
And
I think we got more notice of that over here.
Yeah, no, you're bringing back like PTSD, man. Like I remember that stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Even now, it's making me shudder. Like, fuck, I remember.
I can remember, going out. I think went out for like a beer or a coffee or something. It was sort of, it was like a couple hours before everything was supposed to sort of close up and everyone had to go home. And we were there and we were sort of thinking, it's like, well, like we don't even really know what's going on. And I was like, well, let's go to hunting and fishing and let's buy some camping stuff. And if everyone says, well, if it is what's going to happen, that we're locked down for like a week or 2 weeks, didn't really think the seriousness of it. And so we were just going to drive out to the beach and live out there for a couple of weeks and just not really locked down at all.
Go a little bit nomad. Yeah.
And then the girl that I was had just started dating at the time, her dad was in the government somehow. I can't exactly remember what, but anyway, she rang him and he was just like, you guys like have to go home. Like, like they're going to be like patrolling the streets. No one's allowed to leave, like this is like really, really serious. It's, blah, 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 blah. And
almost
so
sounds like martial law.
Yeah. I mean,
it was, bro.
Back in my head was just like, I mean, I didn't know how long we were going to be essentially, how long it was going to last or whatnot. So I hadn't really thought, I had thought a little bit about the businesses, like, well, if we're closed, how are we going to, we've still got outgoings essentially, especially just starting up, got loans to pay back, still got to pay for like power, even though we're not there. And, so that sort of started running through my mind as well. But yeah, I guess like thinking back now, like it all happened like pretty fast and you kind of you just had to, well, we didn't know what was going on, we didn't.
Yeah. It was a similar thing for us, like we as a church, the men got together in the church and said, we've heard about this possible virus that can kill people, and it's going to spread through the community. We got to get prepared for this. So there was this kind of what I would say is naivety towards like, and I know this is really leaning hard into my sort of tinfoil hat, but like there was this naivety of like, well, we'll trust the government. Whatever they say, we'll just do what they're saying for now and see how it happens, and we'll see what happens. And there was this kind of like going with it. There was no real desire at the start to fight against anything. It was like, okay, well, we'll just go with this. Oh, that's the new law. I guess okay. And I think it wasn't until much later on, at least in my experience, that I realized, there's something really wrong here. There's something wrong. And at that point in time, it had already kind of been forced into the I guess you could call it the zeitgeist or the society. It had already been sort of absorbed to the point where, people were kind of buying it, and I don't usually use that kind of language, but this one's pretty close to my heart. And I think, I definitely like even my family were thinking about just going up to a property and staying there for a few weeks, and with this will all blow over sort of attitude, and that I guess was naive to us in hindsight as well. But like we didn't have a business to worry about, we didn't have bills to pay like you did, and so it was certainly and it wasn't necessarily easy for us, So I want to understand, like, was there a point in time where you realized, okay, I'm not really sure I agree with some of the things that we're being asked to do?
At what point did that happen? Like, for example, as obviously you were shut down, I can't remember how many weeks you were shut down initially for before they sort of opened it. As you said, a lot of it's a blur. But, at what point, obviously the government started bringing in obviously subsidies for business, obviously to prop up, and it propped up a lot of businesses that probably should have failed ages ago, because as soon as they finished, those businesses went anyway. But obviously the subsidies came in, the lockdown started to be a bit longer. At what point, because you had all your staff in there, I believe you told me that you had to sort of canvass your staff and say, hey, look, guys, But now we've got these vaccine mandates, and eventually they came in much later on, later 2020, 21, probably about 6 to 9 months later. You know, how long did it take in that process from, hey, look, you know, we've got this so-called virus, we're happy to comply, great. How long did it take from that point at which everybody shut down to go, hang on a second, I think for most of us, you know, we're all about staying healthy. There's a little bit more to this, and we don't agree with this. How long? Can you just walk us through that process? I guess not even just as a business owner, but just as a free-thinking human being. Yeah.
Yeah, I think meeting. Well, Rick and I already knew each other back then, but I think getting to know each other a little bit more intimately, and sort of starting our relationship, I think she's been a huge sort of help in essentially, you know, asking questions, I guess, or just being like, you know, like,
yeah, I've always been, I guess, a bit see things differently. Also like to think different.
Bit of a skeptic?
Yeah. Just see the world a little, I don't know, from the outside. And yeah, when it first kind of happened, it was like interesting just watching everyone talk about it. Because yeah, I don't know, I know things that, or what I do think of like World War One or World War Two and other events, it's like, it's never what they say it is. And then I think first lockdown, I think it was after a week, Caleb was kind of, because we were friends at the time, just about work and the bills due and just that this can't, like, what's he meant to do? And so his first kind of rebellion was starting a secret burger delivery company. But it wasn't very secret. They posted on their Instagram saying who wants burgers, we're delivering it. And then, because we all kind of had a little friend group during COVID that we all kind of stuck together. And then taking different cars out and doing deliveries. And then I think the police finally caught on and showed up at the house and said, "What are you guys up to?"
Yeah, they showed up
sneaking around feeding people. Ooh. Yeah, that's right.
Well, we had applied for essential services, or essentially we were trying to look for the essential services to do with, like, essentially to do what we could do, but there wasn't any. So we just applied for an essential service that was it wasn't food. It was like wasn't food related. I was like, oh, this is close enough. So I printed out the form, filled out the form, and on the form it said, as soon as you apply for essential services, you can operate as essential services until essentially it's accepted or denied. So anyway, we were cooking our burgers and stuff at the restaurant, and everyone was sort of coming in and out, and obviously, you know, in a little town like Masterton that's supposed to be locked down and no one's supposed to be out, the police saw all these cars going in and out of Seb's, and next thing there's a knock on the door. But I showed them, they're like, you can't do this, you know, like, you can't be here, like, blah, blah. I was like, oh, no, I can, like, I'm essential service. So I showed them my form that I'd filled out, and so they looked at it and they're like, oh, okay, all right, all good. And then they left, and then they came back the next day to my house and was just like, hey, look, we looked at your form and it's for non-food related, you know, services. And I was just like, oh, you know, is it? You know, kind of play dumb a bit. And looking on that situation now, you know, like, it wasn't to do with, you know, it was more, I guess, it was essentially a like desperation. Survival. You know, like, you know, I didn't know, you know, how we could, essentially like how we're going to keep going if we don't have any sort of income and stuff. So
because you got subsidies from the government, but it just covered,
and that was later on,
80% of wages.
Yeah.
So they were essentially making us do what the dole would do, but they were making businesses do it. But there was no money for anything else.
So just sticking on that point for a second of what you're saying, like at this point, you know, because obviously you could probably appreciate, but other people might say, oh, we were following the rules while you were breaking them to survive your business, whereas you would say, and probably we would agree with you, in fact we would agree with you, that at that point, obviously with yourself, Victoria, and perhaps influencing a little bit about Caleb's thinking about actually what this whole pandemic, if we want to call it that, was. At this point, it was like, well, we don't actually think this is actually what it is, and we're having a business here that's basically going to be destroyed. And was it a case of we actually don't think our governments actually care about small business, so I really have to do something about this because no one's here to help? Is that how it felt at the time?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess because that was like quite early. That was like quite early on at the start of everything. So yeah, it was like the government at that stage hadn't offered, you know, businesses or small businesses any kind of help or solution. It was just like, you guys shut down. And I think the thing, I guess, like when my sort of, you know, the way that I started thinking of when things didn't really make sense was, you know, it was like supermarkets, you know, like, you know, I'm glad they were there and open over the time, but, you know, so we could, you know, eat. But it was just like, well, like if everyone's so concerned about staying in their little bubbles and not having contact with anyone, but then everyone goes to the supermarket and there's queues and queues of people and everyone's around each other in a supermarket anyway,
touching all the food.
How is this the safest way of getting through this? You know, like that was...
Or turning up in line at a Kloeg clinic and everyone's bunched up together to go and get tested for COVID. That's obviously a discussion for another day, but it's like if you have to go and get tested for COVID, if it's that deadly and you're standing in line coughing and spluttering. And like you said about the big business, it seemed to me and to a lot of people during this whole COVID session that it was only big business who were allowed to be open. Over here it was Coles and Woolworths and Bunnings. In New Zealand it's Masterton, you have Bunnings in the major sectors, Kmart, bottle stores, you know, non-essential places.
Macca's.
Yeah.
So
KFC.
as a small business owner, you're looking at it and you're thinking to yourself, hang on, come on, no. Is that kind of what, am I sort of drawing out what you were feeling at the time, both of you, obviously, as it sort of went on?
Yeah, I guess so. And it wasn't like a thought of like, oh, this is unfair or anything like that. It was just nothing. It just didn't make sense. Like nothing made sense of the essentially the rules and regulations that were brought in. And then from that, so that just stemmed into like just, I guess, you know, going down all the rabbit holes, essentially. And we're just you know, looking at, I guess what it says, look at the science, you know, like, and you know, I guess like Vic and I, and a whole lot of other people as well, and probably including you guys looked at the science, you know, like you looked at and both sides of the science, whereas mainstream media would say that, you know, you can only look at this science because this science is wrong, whereas like us with more of an open sort of mind and sort of like free thinkers would, you know, be like, okay, like, well, you know, that could be plausible, but this also could be plausible. You know, and actually this, you know, the other side it makes a lot more sense than essentially what we're being fed.
Yeah.
And no, carry on. Yeah, you go.
I think your sentiment was definitely shared amongst a lot of the hospitality industry. Like there was a lot of confusion about, well, why is this okay but this isn't okay? Like I even at the time where I was still relatively like not invested in really researching this, I was hearing that from people who I knew in the hospitality industry, and they're like, oh, that doesn't make sense, you know. There was even in the transport industry, so in public transport and in taxis, people who I knew that were working in taxis are like, it's really weird. We're still allowed to operate, and yet they're not allowed to drive to their friend's house. It's weird, you know. And look, so I guess what I'm saying is, you know, there definitely is a large majority, I think, of people who were very skeptical about what was being presented, you know. If I can ask, it seems like when you took on the burger delivery business, which, by the way, sounds awesome. I'm going to have to come and have one of your burgers, bro. And I want to make your burger as well.
This guy actually does some of the best burgers I've ever tasted. I haven't actually tasted yours, but yeah, if you ever come over here, you're welcome.
I promise you.
Yeah, nice. Sounds good.
It'll be good. But did things escalate from there? Like, did you, I guess, like there were instances of really, I guess the best words I can use to describe is like really brutal enforcement from the police, you know, about these rules and regulations, and even more brutal from sort of the government established agencies that would sort of, like, I think you mentioned health ministry, you know, like they were really rough, they were really hard on people. Did you experience any of that after the burger delivery business sort of took off, or any time after that? Did it escalate?
No, I wouldn't say like are you talking like, you know, like physical brutality?
No. Does they come in and try to shut your establishment down? I think you'd mentioned that to me, that you were in the restaurant and the police at the time. Certainly in New Zealand, I don't think they were as brutal as over here, but I do recall you saying that they did come to the establishment at one point, or was that earlier what you had already shared with us when you put up your essential services sign? Was that instance there that they came to?
Yeah, that was the instance there, and I think and there was another time actually when it was in another. I can't remember how many lockdowns we really had, or.
Well, yeah, because it was the first lockdown, and then we came out of it and went back to normal. But I think everyone wear masks then. And we were probably one of the few restaurants that wore mask exemptions. So it kind of this thing, because it is a small community that, you know, like, oh, they're those people and they wear the mask exemptions. That was pretty shocking.
I love that you say that. I actually really love that you say that. Oh man, so carry on.
Yeah. Well, that was another thing that didn't make any sense, because it was like, you know, when you essentially get out of your car and walk up to the restaurant, you must wear a mask. And then you must wear a mask until you're seated, and then when you are seated, you can take your mask off. But then when you go to the toilet, you got to put your mask back on, and then
your server goes
around,
spreading.
And all the servers are supposed to be wearing masks, but everyone else isn't wearing masks.
But we printed off mask exemptions for anyone at work that wanted to wear them. Like, if you want to wear a mask, go for it. But if you didn't...
The worst part at the time is that it made, and I could probably speak for a lot of people, it actually, at the time, my belief is that was designed to have forced compliance, unscientific compliance, in my opinion. And on the other side, it was done to create anxiety and anger and just frustration in the likes of us. And I certainly felt that at the time. Now I look back, and eventually that subsided into, I used it as comedy, because it made me feel lighthearted knowing that wasn't with the science, and turned it into comedy, and that sort of made the anger and frustration with the whole thing subside. I guess just to sort of tap into that, did you ever get into a place where, you know, it became quite frustrating, or how did you sort of, as business owners and as a business owner, how did you sort of calm your nerves at times when these things would have been, let's just call it straight, would have been really pissing you off? You know, you would have been sitting here thinking, you know, come on, when is this going to end? Not only is this not making sense, but it's almost like you're looking at a sea of people with compliance, and you're asking, is anybody waking up here? Like, come on, guys, like, you know, how did you sort of calm your nerves and sort of steady yourself during that sort of, let's say, 24 months, but I guess that first 12 months?
Yeah, I guess we sort of, we took the approach of, I guess, trying to make people feel as comfortable and safe, I guess, as we could. And we allowed people to, with the whole, like, the mask thing, and even with the passport thing, we just said, this is what we're doing. You know, if you don't feel comfortable, you know, you don't have to come in. But if you do, we'd love to serve you, like, have you and host you, essentially. So it wasn't really a thing that was, like, talked about that much of being like, you know, like, we don't wear masks, or like we don't want you to wear a mask in here. We just said, like, if you guys want to wear a mask inside, like that's cool, because and a lot of people would come and they were like, oh, we love coming here because we don't have to, everywhere else we got to wear this mask and we don't have to wear this mask here, and we just said, hey, look, that's like completely up to you. Like, we didn't claim anything. We just
didn't condemn or condone.
Do anything. We just wanted people to have, I guess, that freedom.
Have their freedom back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what I feel like your ethos kind of is. Like, you do you, and we do us, and it's just...
Yeah, we're not out here we don't purposefully go out to offend anyone, or anything like that. We're doing what we believe is the right thing, or just we believe this is how we want to do something.
Yeah.
And our customers essentially have the choice whether they want to come in or not, and we're not gonna force them to come in. We're not gonna make fun of them when they come in. We're not gonna, we're not gonna not serve them when they come in. Like that is hospitality. It's
in the face of like paper reports, national TV reports, because I think at some stage your little cafe and including Mike's, I believe at some stage, your other brother who runs the bakery there. At one stage, it was on national television, from what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was a very short snippet. When I guess some of the backlash came for staying open and conducting your business that way, naturally there would have been people in the community who were quite snidey about it. Like you said, you tried to hold the position of, look, we're not out here trying to condemn others for their decision, but this is our decision with our bodies, with our business, and we're asking you to respect that lawfully, and also within the community. Obviously, there would have been others in the community. Nationally is a different scale, because obviously you just live in your own towns. But I guess how were you able to sort of keep it together emotionally when obviously naturally you knew that there are other people in town, even people that you knew, who would be snidey and quite the opposite of the approach that you've just told us that you took?
I think that's one of Caleb's skill sets, and a reason why I love him is he's very cool, calm, and collective. It taught me that over COVID, because I had quite a few run-ins, which is something I'm grateful that COVID kind of taught me, is how to deal with differences. But yeah, so we're kind of waiting on the day that we decided, or day traffic light system started, because that was kind of when we had to make that decision. We went out to dinner to another restaurant, and then we were like, oh, is this our last dinner out being unvaxxed? And then we came up with heaps of ideas. It was kind of like, oh, we could get around it by doing this, or we could let people come in, but we'll just look like we're doing it so we don't get in trouble. And we're just trying to do anything we could. But he just kept saying like, oh, I don't know, I just can't, and I was sort of like, what is it like? And then he just said, I can't do it. And then we got a call from our lawyer. And just after leaving the restaurant, which we both left in tears, but it was kind of like a beautiful, transitioning point. And then when we got a call from our lawyer, we were telling her all our plans. Okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and she's just like, hold on, where did you read this legislation? Like, what are you going off? And we're like, oh, like we heard it on the news, or old mate told us, or
like 3 different government websites that all said slightly different things. So it's really hard. Kind of know what were the rules and essentially what weren't the rules.
And then she just stopped us, and she was like, so you haven't read that anywhere in law, or you haven't read any legislation that this is what you need to do? And then we just said no, and then she's like, well, there's your answer. And we just kind of looked at each other and just it was like being freed.
So what you're saying is, I love that saying. I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Peterson and that lady. What you're saying is, without taking the words out of your mouth, you may not be familiar with that. Sorry, it's not an inside joke, but other readers, other listeners will know what that is. So you sort of discovered that these are guidelines that the government had put in there, but they weren't lawful legislation. Is that what you're saying? You discovered that they weren't lawful legislation, and essentially, which is interesting, because if it was a pandemic, if we would agreed that it was, and not that there wasn't a flu, but that it was obviously as deadly as it was made out to be, you would think that it would be law, wouldn't you?
Yeah. That kind of happened here a lot. Like people were confused as to what was legally binding and what was guidelines. And what we found was that the guidelines were being presented as legally binding. And that was something that the sort of, if you were coming from a legislative perspective, you would see like, oh, this is, there's no real basis for any kind of consequence for not adhering to this guideline, but if you were a layman like I was at the time, and a lot of my friends were, it's like, oh, well, if I don't get vaxxed, I lose my job, and a lot of workplaces took guidelines, health minister guidelines, as legally binding, and there was so much confusion about it that I think the vast majority of people made decisions under a false pretense. So I share that sort of elation when I realized certain aspects of the rules that were being touted were not actually legally binding. And I really do wish a lot of people knew that. And of course, they're not going to tell them that. There's not going to be an open expression of, okay, well, you don't have to do this, because we know what would happen. No one would do it. It's that simple,
So you mentioned at this point, then you've sort of had that discussion with your lawyer. You've realised these are not legally binding, and you go off and carry on with the business. At this point, can you just walk us through at that point how that changed the nature of how you were conducting your business? And I also believe there were some fines that came into the mix as well, and we'll get to that eventually, and what actually happened to those. But can you just sort of walk us through how that changed then, just the whole nature of running the business from there?
Yeah, of course. I guess during obviously when the traffic light system kicks out, because we weren't worried about, we weren't only worrying about essentially ourselves in the business, but we also, we've got staff, and
Sorry, Caleb, just quickly, sorry. Victoria mentioned that earlier. What's the traffic light system? What is that?
So the traffic light system was essentially, from what I understand, but it was instead of going into like lockdown, so you'd have green, orange, and red. Green, if we're in green, essentially means, business as usual, go around, no lockdown or anything like that. COVID's still around. If it was orange, it meant that businesses only have a certain amount of people in their premise at one time. So up to 50 people, I think. And you had to have like social distancing. When it was in red, businesses essentially that were fully vaccinated could operate, but could only have vaccinated customers.
So Victoria, we were just talking about the traffic light system, and you were just explaining a little bit about how that worked. I think, Caleb, you said at the time, it was sort of like, go red, orange, green. Can you just give us a bit of a rundown of, because Cody was mentioning in Australia we had a completely different system, so I'm sort of familiar with how it worked, but just for our listeners, and I guess those who are sort of wondering what that is, can you just give us a rundown of what that was in the business and how it sort of ran?
So the traffic light system essentially was put in place so they wouldn't have to fully, from what I understand, so they wouldn't have to fully lock down the whole country. So essentially different areas of the country could operate or would be in different light zones. I don't know if you guys heard, but Auckland was in red for,
was it weeks after us?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, for ages, for 6 months or something. It was ridiculous.
They had their own special lockdowns.
The country was in orange. But essentially it meant that green means all good, you you don't need it. There's no restrictions, essentially. Orange meant that you could have up to 50 people in like a closed space, I guess, in a restaurant or a retail store or anything, but you had to have like social distancing, make sure you had social distancing. And I don't know if you could, was it vaxxed and unvaxxed?
I think, well, that's what it was quite a big turning point for heaps of people, because that's when essentially, like, if you're a teacher and you weren't vaccinated, you couldn't, because we went straight into red. And so that's when, a lot of people made their choice, I guess. So like, my mum lost her job, my dad lost his job.
Oh, I got so many stories.
Yeah. And then red obviously was like, still can operate, but you only can have, like, I don't know, 10, maybe red was 50 people and orange was 100.
Yeah, but only vaxxed.
So only vaxxed, yeah.
So unvaxxed could only be served through takeaway, non-contact.
And I guess the worst part about that is finding out that it doesn't really matter if you're vaxxed or not vaxxed, it transmits anyway.
But supermarkets didn't have any rules, so you could still go to the supermarket.
And touch it, and basically come in your car wearing a mask, in your car, by yourself, take the mask off your face while touching the mask, and then touch your doors, go inside the supermarket and touch all the food and everything that's in there, and breathe,
Jace didn't like the masks, if you can't tell. My dad.
I don't have trauma, but I just
my dad was one of the first people in Victoria that was arrested for not wearing a mask.
Gangster.
And he called me when he was being arrested, and I couldn't believe the scene that I was hearing on.
And he's a very mild man too. He's
meek as really, and honestly, the police mishandled it. They totally mishandled it. He refused to put on a mask to go into a particular business, and I guess they would call him a Karen. He was a total Karen. But at the same time, I actually have a lot of respect for my father. Already, I love my dad, but he went through a very big phase of just full on rejection of this whole mask thing, because he saw that as the tipping point. Don't even get me started on the vaccination. There's no mate, that was beyond the pale for dad. So
my wife will listen to this at some point. It's been a long time since you've met my wife, Caleb, but she was a very mild-mannered, quiet person before COVID, and obviously when it eventuated, she's a completely different person. She wanted to march into the streets, and some people would just change them. So, I recall two stories where she was so fed up at the start, and of course a little bit of bitterness got the best of a lot of us, and she went to a pharmacy here locally where we live, and there was like 10 people standing around her at one point telling her how terrible she was and selfish. And she came out of there crying. And also, where we were in New South Wales as well, she got sent out the back of a hospital because she refused to be tested. She had some stuff going on, just health stuff like we all do. And they booted her out the back of the hospital because, she didn't want to be tested for COVID, and she didn't have COVID. She didn't go there for COVID. So I think we've all got those sort of stories there.
Yeah.
I used to go, funnily enough, just to put a bit of humour into this, when I would go into supermarkets without a mask on. I'm generally a fairly jovial sort of a person, but at this stage I had a big beard. I looked a bit rough, so I would just have this really like aggro face, grumpy face on, so no one would bug me at all walking through a supermarket. And then of course I'd walk out and I'd just burst out laughing as I'm going off with my shopping cart over to the car. So you just had to, right? You just had to inject a bit of comedy, but it's all right to put that in there.
And like Dad was very much like yourselves, and so was I. If you want to wear a mask, if that's your decision, then do it. And I'm not going to make you feel bad about it. I think when it came to personal liberty, I'm more for personal liberty than I am for anything. And I think people had the right to choose to wear a mask. And they shouldn't be ridiculed for it. And I wish they felt the same. It's
if you're protected with a mask, then feel protected. If a vaccination protects you, then you should be protected. We're talking about science at the start of this. We're not really delving into the sciencey side of it so much this evening, but that really what it was, isn't it? It was about looking at the science and saying, okay, please show us the facts and figures on the science, and stop obfuscating, stop, darting around certain things. So if you were safe with a mask, if you were safe with vaccination, scientifically, then anybody else who didn't mask up or who didn't take a vaccination should die or should get really, really sick. And that wasn't always the case. In fact, most of the time it wasn't the case. And then, of course, in New Zealand, one of the things, we'll get off this topic in a second, but one of the most insidious things that I found in New Zealand was protect your whānau.
the marketing.
The marketing in New Zealand with protect your whānau. They really went straight for the family and made it a real cuddly thing, so that people would then, be like, oh, you don't like whānau, you don't like family, and have that.
If you love grandma, you'll wear a mask or you'll get vaccinated.
It's the exact same thing here, man.
Same thing here, but
protect your vulnerable family members. Don't be selfish. Just really, really
a bit of a
like gaslighting, manipulative stuff. But that aside, when it comes to how you ran your business, because obviously you continue to run your business after this sort of traffic light implementation. Were there times like would you have 50? Would you have like 10 tables, or would you have 50 people in the restaurant at any given time?
Well, our restaurant is it seats probably about 60 to 70 people inside. So it can get. But even then, I think when they brought in the like the 1 meter social distancing, having your tables 1 meter apart and stuff, our restaurant's quite big, so we could essentially still fit everyone in while still being socially distanced safely.
But a couple of times it definitely got over. I think there was one night because we get a few of the young ones coming because we're open after 10 o'clock, which is one of 3 places in Masterton. And then that's when that kind of weird investigator cop used to just park across the road and watch us.
I forgot about him.
Yeah, but he kind of just disappeared. But he wasn't happy about it. He's like, "You're not doing it."
He was over from Wellington, and he was just like, "You gotta do it." And I was like, "Can you please show me the law where it says that I have to?" And he couldn't.
Yeah.
We said he'll get back to you.
Well, he said he'll get back to me.
Yeah.
So are these people on a? I mean, when you're hearing these people, like seeing this guy across the road, do you think these people are just on power trips, or I mean, it's hard to speculate, right? But I mean, I get the feeling that there were some individuals in the community who just felt the need to be on power trips. Like you said, he couldn't show you the legislation. So either there are individuals who just enjoyed the fact that now they can have a power trip over society in certain sectors of it, or they're basically really told to really push this regardless of the science. It's I don't want to go into that rabbit hole now.
Look, but it's pretty reductive to go to those two ultimatums. But I will say, I think the majority was that second one. Like it was just pushed so hard down the line. Even like from a law enforcement perspective. So Victoria Police was criticised pretty heavily. Well, Victoria's the state that we're in here in Australia. They were criticised pretty heavily about what I meant before when I said brutal was how they were like. Unyielding, like this is the rule, follow the rule, and if you're not going to follow the rule, you're going to get arrested,
Yeah.
So a lot of the perception from the public here in Victoria was that Victoria Police was very black and white, like it's like you follow this or you don't follow this. But and I guess
it was very brutal here.
Well, I think it was that. Man, they were just pushed. They were just told this is what has to happen from on high. And obviously, there's those who fell into the power trip, as always in any law enforcement or authoritative role. You're going to have people who abuse the authority that they have. But I think mostly these, and I have softened over time. A lot of these people were just as much victims of the same system. They were just in a different position, and I know that's very forgiving and very light on some people that may have made some bad decisions during this. But I did know police officers who left the force because of it.
They had trauma. Yeah, they had a lot of trauma, and that it's like I'm losing my job, and But if just a quick one, if you had your business open and conducted yourself in a way which we both agree with, and a lot of people who are going to listen to this when we're finished would also agree with, you would have had your doors busted down. You would have gone out in handcuffs over here. That's how. And I think in some ways the New Zealand police were a lot lighter, they were still wrong, and obviously they're following obviously what they were told. But yeah, the business side of it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So I think when initially on the first sort of lockdowns and all of that kind of stuff, I think it was up to the police to essentially enforce the lockdown rules. Where it came to the traffic light system, it was essentially put onto the police to enforce those rules. The New Zealand police said we can't, and I think that was in a way, you know, a little bit of saving grace in terms of, you know, the not escalating, you know, as much as it did over in Australia, but they just said we've got our plates full with, you know, crime and you know, helping, you know, families and all of that kind of stuff. Where they said that they're not going to be able to get. Essentially, they said they're not going to get around to it, and all of that. And we had a so over in Masterton, being a small town, Christmas Eve is essentially like just it's pretty much just a big school reunion, and so we normally throw like a little bit of a party at the restaurant, kind of by default. It just happened one year that everyone sort of turned up and weren't expecting it. So the following year we thought we'd be a little bit more prepared, and it was during the traffic light system where we'd been operating anyway, and the place was packed. You know, it was really packed, and it was about 11:30 at night. I think we'd pretty much just closed the bar and closing, you know, sort of wrapping things down, even though there's a lot of people there, and about 12 police officers. All of a sudden, all these cops parked up outside, and like 12 police officers like walked into the building in like this like triangle formation, sort of like a wall and this barrier, like
the phalanx.
I wouldn't say like what's the word? Not aggressively or anything like that, but quite formal and a little bit staunch and whatnot. And they just came in, they looked around, you know, they made sure that we had like the appropriate signage and just, you know, all the like liquor licensing stuff and all of that. Looked around, saw that everyone was like very, very well behaved and having a good time and all of that kind of stuff, and then left, and then they went around the corner to a bar and sorted out a few scraps, I think, and all of that kind of stuff. But when we were sort of cleaning up, one of the sergeants came back and he walked in and he personally thanked me, and he was like, thank you for, you know, essentially running a good ship and keeping everyone safe and having no dramas and all that kind of stuff, which, you know, that to me was quite a big sort of eye-opener.
Because literally, like, we had some people working there, or one lady, she ran when she saw the police. Like, they thought, like, and we all kind of had that feeling. We're like, is it about COVID, or is it they're just checking in on us?
Yeah.
And we were just waiting to kind of, I don't know what was going to happen, be arrested or. But it was nice to see they were kind of in support, because I feel like the cops here, refuse to deal with it, and I don't know, but I have a feeling it's because they know it wasn't lawful and they deal with the law, so it's putting them at risk. And then also because they lost so many people in their force that it was screwing them over so much.
It was very.
And I think it was good for them to see that essentially we're not, you know, the bad guys as everyone made us out to be. Just being like, oh, they don't listen to the rules and they just flout the rules and all of that kind of stuff. Where actually the reason why I started the restaurant in the first place was for this community. Everyone's welcome, you know, that kind of stuff. So which kind of fell through into the whole COVID stuff anyway. But
because that's what they did really well here. Is the police didn't enforce it. WorkSafe they had no idea what they were doing. But but they got the people to enforce it.
Yeah,
so we did get a bit
right.
of flat at the start, which we were kind of, just waiting, for people walking down the road with pitchforks.
That's the thing, if you can get the people to enforce it. I mean, if you can get your neighbour to snitch on you. And I think that might have been the slight difference between Australia and New Zealand, at least from my perspective. The police were more brutal here. I know that there were some police that didn't want to be involved, and some of them are just traumatised from the experience and left the force. But I found the police were a lot more brutal here, less in New Zealand. But over here, we had way more non-compliance. I don't want to speak for all New Zealanders, but from the outside looking in, I was quite disappointed with New Zealand in that sense, that you had that basically compliance from your neighbours and everybody snitching on each other. Whether that's just a case of education, I don't know. But with the police there, just on that, do you think one of the things about local, because it's local policing in a small town as well, do you think there was an element of, hey, we've got to work in this community when this is all done, so let's take an easier approach on our constituents that we're serving here as the police, because we're going to see them next week, and there's less of that anonymousness that you get in the cities. Do you think that might have played a part, or who knows?
Who knows? To be honest, I think. I mean, I'd like to probably think that was a thought process that they, that went through their minds. But it's hard to say.
When it
can't really do a solid answer on that one.
Yeah.
But just going back on that sort of that snitching sort of mentality that kind of came out in New Zealand, which was very surprising to see. Apparently, 80% of the complaints that WorkSafe received were within industry. So it was essentially industry snitching on industry. So it's like, with like a, hospitality, like a cafe or restaurant, be like, oh, like we're doing the rules, but that one's not. And, same with other industry as well, that was the, that's how it went down, rather than essentially, the whole motto that Jacinda Ardern was trying to, get out there was be kind and let's look after each other. Where in fact, what happened was, the opposite, essentially, with full intention that was going to be the case as well.
Yeah.
So would you say that transitions to about whereabouts you guys are now, or is there quite a bit more to the story of your business and how things went with your COVID experience?
Well, obviously from essentially the going into the traffic light system, we had to, the decisions that we made were for essentially the community, us and our staff. And we went into it, pretty much on the basis of that there is no law on it. There is no legislation that holds to essentially what the media and what the government is portraying and saying that, this is what you should do, whereas there was actually nothing really to back it up. And so on that basis, essentially, we essentially opened as usual. I think it was like 3 or 4 days of opening as usual. And as soon as essentially we opened, I was like, WorkSafe is going to be on our doorstep, immediately, straight away. So they'd come in a few times with the masks thing as well. And they were like, oh, why aren't you guys wearing masks? And I was like, well, we've all got mask exemptions, so they couldn't really do much with that. So then about 4 days afterwards, a WorkSafe officer came in. He was like, oh, oh, are you aware of the traffic light system? And I said, I'm aware of the traffic light system. And he was like, how are you implementing the traffic light system? And I just said, I was like, oh, I chose not to enter into that contract. And that was
I love that response. Yeah.
And so he didn't really know what to say. He was like, oh, okay, well, you could get a fine. And I said, maybe.
You love those words.
Told me essentially not to say yes, not to say no, and not to claim anything. And me being me, my mouth just blabs, and half the time I don't even know what I'm talking about anyway. But so I was shitting myself, in all honesty. Like when I was like, I don't know what I want to say, like I'm gonna freeze, all that kind of stuff.
I feel like he was in the same position. Like it's like they'd given him a new form, and he's like, okay, he's chosen step B, and he's like, okay, follow this graph down here, and then he was just like,
and they didn't have a piece in the paper to like, oh, there's no
I choose C.
Yeah, I choose C. Oh, we didn't have a C. We just had A. Yeah, I love that word could. You love that word could. It's great sales speak and advertising. Could, it might, it should, it approximately. Those words are just they're so loose. But it was a good there's a good response. Entering into a contract. You mentioned it. It's like it's not you refuse to comply. You're like, oh no thanks, I'm good. Is basically what it was. Yeah. No thanks, I'm good. I appreciate your concern, but no thanks, I'm good. Yeah.
Well, even though they don't tell us things, I feel like they always tell us things. And one thing I always noticed in the ads, because you'd hear it on the radio, TV, just constant. And it would always just be the businesses who choose to opt into the traffic light system, and then never leave it out.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, it's an option. And she said it at the end as well. She's like, you guys chose to do that. Oh, you lost your business? Well, you chose to enter in.
Yeah, so she said that she was like, we didn't force businesses to do what they had to do. They chose it, and as brutal as it is, like she was 100% right. Yes, like there was essentially, she was like, oh, if you don't do it, then you could get a fine, and that was essentially the deterrent,
the stick,
which most people which worked essentially. But at the end of the day, it was a choice.
So when it came to this visit with this masked person, it happened a couple of times. Like, did that eventuate into any kind of fine? Was there any threat of a fine?
So we got 2 fines in the mail. And
we got one of those things in the door, and Kel was like, "Oh, what did I buy?" So he went down to the door.
They couldn't even present them. They couldn't even present them face to face. They had to send it in the mail.
You were served.
Yeah, I can remember messaging my lawyer. I was just like, "Is it normal that they send it in the mail?" And she replied back with something along the lines of like, "Oh, they don't really like to show face anymore." So we received the fine. It was 2 fines in the mail. One was for $4,000 for not displaying a sign that we were doing.
Whether we were or weren't doing the traffic light system.
Yeah, whether we were or we weren't doing the traffic light system. And we had a sign on our doors saying we welcome everyone, regardless of, age, ethnicity, vaccination, all that kind of stuff, which, to me could be argued as we've got a sign saying that we're not doing it.
Yeah.
And then the second fine was for not enforcing the traffic light system. We're not having adequate systems in place to check if people had the passport.
How much was that one?
Which becomes null and void because we had a sign saying that we weren't doing the traffic light system. So
okay.
It's $12,000.
Which was $12,000.
If you knew that money was going into COVID research, would you have paid it?
What's that? Can you repeat that?
I said if you knew that money was going into COVID research, would you have paid it? If you knew it was going to a good cause?
I don't know. Depends.
That's a trick question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Depends which research.
Exactly. Did you end up paying them?
No. So we haven't paid it, and we're just going through the process hopefully the final process at the moment. It's quite interesting because essentially the breach that we made in the act doesn't exist anymore. So
wow,
well, it's very strange.
Wow.
So we got which we just found out recently due to Victoria, well, my father-in-law, and he's like a health and safety like guru. Like he does it for a living. He works with businesses to get essentially their health and safety up to not up to scratch, further, like beyond scratch, really, like, you know, getting it to a really, really high level. And he looked at, essentially, it was like in breach of the Health and Safety in Employment Act, which essentially was annulled in 2016 and replaced with the Work and Safety in Work Act 2016. So essentially they find us under a breach of an act that they got rid of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hoping that you wouldn't look.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds strange.
Which is either coincidentally a clerical error.
They did that on purpose, bro.
Or they
Doesn't it make you just to latch onto that, and then I got a follow-up question. When you get that sort of stuff in the mail and you look into it further, and I think, like you were saying, Victoria, is that, you know, you start to look into things. It starts to strike you as, I mean, it's like you don't want to go down this rabbit hole. You don't want to be Alice in Wonderland. But when you see something like that, where it's like you changed the act in 2016 and you find me under an old act that's not there, these things can't be an accident, and they start adding up into breadcrumbs. That's when the whole paradigm, that's when the whole thing starts to sort of fall away, don't you feel? You start to look into other areas, and that starts to fall away, and eventually you come to a place where, without trying to be cliche about it, because a lot of people have referenced it, but it's almost like you're seeing the Matrix for what it is. With that kind of imagery, does that sound familiar?
Yeah, well, especially because we kind of just like left the fines because we had no idea what to do with them. Kind of had a plan, but then we're waiting for them to take us to court, and then they just went straight to bailiff, which was weird that they really don't want people to take them to court because everyone that's gone to court, I believe, has won. But yeah, when I showed my dad, and everyone said that, just ask Dad, but you kind of always just like, oh, don't ask Sala, but you always go to Dad when you need help. And he just looked at it straight away, and he's just like, yeah, original fine, they did it under the breach of the COVID protection framework, which, yeah, questionable in itself. But then, yeah, second one, as you say, they just changed it like that to a an annulled piece of legislation that doesn't exist anymore. And it was just so like, yeah, I feel like the answer's always there, and it just shows when you follow your truth. I feel like things magically, like, we are fine, everything's okay.
Yeah.
And just a quick follow-up question, and this one, I'm going to phrase this question in a certain way to, you probably know me by now, Caleb. I'm going to phrase this question in a certain way that's super careful, and which you'll be able to answer it in a very careful way without doxing anybody or anything or any place. Is it possibly true that in the Waited Upper, at the same time as your venue was open, mask-free, and allowing people in whether they were vaxxed or not, that there were perhaps medical practitioners who, at the same time, while potentially jabbing people with obviously the COVID vaccines, and also going along with these mask mandates and restrictions, were also potentially dining at your premises without a mask at the same time. Have I phrased that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm better with faces and terrible with names, but there is,
without naming anybody,
there is I wouldn't be able to, but yeah, there was a lot of people that we would have thought that wouldn't enter into our premise that came in, surprisingly. Yeah, if that.
Supreme Court judges, chief of police, you know.
WorkSafe came in.
Well, WorkSafe had they had like a function there. Well, not a function, but like they had like a dinner. There was like 8 of them that came in, and
with or without masks.
Hey, come on, man.
We didn't name names. That's government. We're allowed to say.
It's a small town. They know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hosted a lovely group of people from the DHB. You know, there was.
But that's the thing, is like it's everyone. Yeah, like you had one run-in with a guy in Wilson's. That's probably the most brutality you received. Is he slapped Kayla's mask exemption away because he was wearing it in Wilson's.
Wow.
And they got into it, and he's another local business owner, who's a bit fiery anyway. But he just didn't like seeing Caleb not in a mask.
And he came to your restaurant and let you prepare him food.
Oh, this was at Wilson's. This was at the local supermarket.
This was at the local watering hole.
Yeah, gotcha.
Where everyone goes and buys their groceries and stuff. He came up to me and he was just pretty much saying how, you know, he's like, you can't do that. Like, why do we have to wear a mask and you don't? I was like, oh, I've got an exemption. And he was just like, oh, like, you know, it's like, he went on and on and on about how he disagreed, and I just carried on trying to do my shopping, and he was pretty keen on a scrap, and I asked him if he wanted to. I was like, is this what you really want? Would you like to have a fight in the supermarket? And he kind of just came up to me and sort of slapped my mask exemption away and stormed off. And you know,
sounds familiar. Yeah.
By calling his work, or like where he worked, because it's kind of like a group. Because I just got all very defensive and protective and complained about him, and then he ended up calling me back. Like his work made him to apologize. Like he called me, he's like, "Apparently, I have to apologize. It's me." And then I was like, "Oh," and I didn't expect it, kind of, and then had a chat. And it was quite interesting because. Yeah, at first we were kind of both racking up at each other, and I was like, "You can't do that. You can't like tell people what to do." And he's like, "Da da da." But he's like, "Do you know what I was doing that day? I took my daughter with me, and I got my vaccination. You think I wanted to do that?"
Yeah.
And that's when it kind of hit me: is that everyone, no matter what you did, everyone was like going through it in their own way.
It was one big psyop. That probably sums it up. Yeah.
But like, you know, this is really important. You know, it's something you're bringing up there, Vic, is that, you know, this was psychologically difficult for everyone. Yeah. You know, and different people, it manifested in different ways. Like my dad was attacked. You know, like not attacked physically, but like told, you know, why aren't you wearing your mask? And he actually is a very humble man when he wants to be. Right, he can also be a very stern guy, but he ended up having a conversation with that person and came to an understanding that they were having a very bad day because of all this craziness in their life. You know. I'm glad that you brought that up, and you know, I have to say it kind of brought out the worst in some people. You know, in some people it really brought out the worst, but in others I think it really gave them an opportunity to show their supporting side. So we were I don't know about Jace. I was involved in a lot of protests in Melbourne. Against like and look, was it effective? Was it
some of us kept our cool, Cody.
But like, you know, some of the people I met at those protests were some of the just the nicest people who really cared about people, you know. And as in some sections of the sort of marches we were doing, people would berate you, you know, like, oh, you guys are all conspiracy theorists and whatnot, and it was interesting to see like both sides of it, you know. These people were just angry and were conforming, you know, and they were just angry that they had to, and other people weren't, and I felt sorry for them, you know, but the people that were marching were doing it for their benefit. It was a really bizarre sort of situation.
Just slipping it in there as well. Those protests in Melbourne that you saw, well, you might have saw snippets. There was 500,000-600,000 people. One of the biggest ones. It was the biggest marches in Victorian history. And media, as they do, reduced it to 10,000 people or 5,000 people. I'm telling you, when we went there, we went once, And then myself and Roberta decided not to go again, because obviously at this stage we didn't know if it was going to escalate from here and become violent on the part of the government. And I think, Vic, you mentioned history. You looked at history. As we've seen from history, things can change pretty quickly. So I advised my wife, because we had a pretty understandably aggro part of Melbourne, particularly in the unions and people that were stopped from working. In the construction, they marched down the highways, and they were on trucks and all sorts of stuff. So I think there was a point at which we were just like, okay, this could actually really, really turn. But just to mention the protests, yeah.
Yeah. So there was a bit of a phenomenon that I noticed during this time period, and I've labelled them. Actually, sorry. Let me finish your story first before I get into that stuff. You had these interesting nights where you'd have, the health and safety guys there and stuff. Was this sort of leading up into 2022 and nearing the end of 2022, or was there more to the story with the fines? Did it ever go to court? Are you expecting it to? And ultimately, how's the business going?
Yeah, how's everything going now, I guess, instead of moving past all this stuff?
So I think during that time when sort of, when we were just open and, people were coming in anyway, that was, I didn't even know that we were still in the traffic light system back then. I think we were in orange or something like that. And I can remember trying to attempt to essentially get off the fine by emailing WorkSafe. And I was just like, which was under I'm trying to think of the word of I called up the WorkSafe officer that had sort of like issued me the fines and had sort of like dealt with my case, and she said, maybe try email WorkSafe and just say that because the traffic lights when out of the traffic light system, the fines don't matter anymore. So I tried that approach, and it kind of backfired because we were still in the traffic light system. I think we're still in it. I don't even know. Yeah. But yeah. So anyway, he was like, we're still in orange. And I was like, oh, really? So, yeah, goes to show anything like that. But I guess
essentially trying to get the fines back into the court system, which now that we can see the almost intentional error, we can easily get it back in, and then once it is in, we go to court, which I'm kind of excited about.
Yeah.
And I feel like you invite your friends, invite the locals, and we'll just go. Yeah, it's not a hard case to win.
Well, I guess finding that
is it still in process at the moment?
So it's still in process at the moment. Yeah.
I thought they'd thrown it out. Sorry, my bad.
Yeah. So the fines are still there, but we're pretty confident that they'll either be dismissed or we will go to court, because essentially, but when we found essentially the error of the breach, that was like essentially like a quick and easy, why don't we see this earlier? Essentially what we were trying to do, essentially go to court, because we never got our day in court, but they had also done clerical, errors, procedural errors, I'd probably call them, because we didn't get given 3 notices. So we only got given 2 notices. Third's, the final sort of thing, but we only got given 2 notices, and then it went straight to collections. We don't know if this will work yet. Pretty confident that, whatever happens essentially is the fine will go back to WorkSafe. They'll decide whether or not they'll reissue it. Once they reissue it, then essentially we'll see you in court. And then once we're in court, I'm very optimistic, but we've pretty much won the case.
Is that in the Masterton District Court, or you have to go to Wellington for that?
I believe it would be in Masterton District Court, because the fine we got from the Ministry of Justice was issued from the Masterton District Court.
Okay.
But they're doing anything they can to not take it.
They're doing everything they can to not go to court.
Yeah.
Because I feel they know that they probably won't.
With a law that doesn't exist.
Well, I'll be praying for it, man. Honestly, I'll be praying for the situation that comes to pass where, you know, a lot of these cases in Victoria, the government was kind of, and look, I do want our government to be a good government. I want them to be successful, but in a lot of cases here, man, they were made to look like fools, you know. And even in Dad's case, he was fined, I think, $4,000 for not obeying the mask thing. They went really hard on him, and he literally just said, "I'm not paying it," you know. And they just dismissed it. It was so bizarre. It was so bizarre. I'd love to tell you some more anecdotes about Dad's experience, even when he was in the police station, and they tried to force a mask on him, and he's like, "You can force it on me. I'm not going to wear it though." But I want to be pretty mindful of your guys' time.
Because obviously you guys are over here. We're 9:15 in Melbourne, Victoria, and it's 11:15 there. So we do appreciate you coming on. But I guess just to sort of summarise and sort of wrap up, we've come through that. You've still got the court proceedings potentially to play out, and in some cases, if they could drop it all together and there was no court and no fines coming through, that would be a great result. But as with these things here, they're likely to want to push this until somebody wins, and it's likely that you will. But sort of moving past that now, we're in 2023. We're almost halfway through. How's it been going this year in 2023? Business, the morale within, you know, coming out of that with your current staff, and obviously you both recently got married. I saw the photos as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
Congratulations.
I should have mentioned that we should have had a little segment. Obviously, if lack of time, we should have gotten to the other things. But you recently got married. Congratulations. And how's the business now with all the staff? As a sort of a feeling of coming through that, and I guess back to normal. I guess.
Yeah, it's back to normal. I guess now it's quite. I guess because when we started the business, you know, we hit COVID, so we, in a business sense, you know, we couldn't essentially complete a full year without interruptions or something out of the ordinary, you know, happening, or, you know, and you know, getting, you know, like a small amount of like government handouts or all that kind of stuff. So like now we've done, you know, almost, or like we've done a full year of trade last year without any interruptions, and you know, we've just started the new financial year. Yeah, on the whole, things are really good. We've got an incredible team. We're still doing what we're doing in Masterton, and people are enjoying it and accepting it. I think on the whole, sort of, especially this year, talking to other businesses around as well, like people are definitely feeling the pinch.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, there's talks of if we're in a recession or if it's coming, or you know, sort of what's going on there. But you know, everyone, I don't know what it's like over in Australia, but over in New Zealand, you know, like interest rates have, you know, gone up. You know, minimum wage has gone up. Cost of food has gone up.
Yeah.
So to general sort of living is gone up. So you can definitely tell that people are more mindful, I guess, of their money, and you know, being essentially a restaurant and a finer one at that, I guess. You know, we are essentially a luxury item for people, so we
have to adjust to that.
I felt the pinch pretty hard.
Yeah,
you have to adjust to that as a business, I guess, in some ways, to sort of keep things working, get people coming in, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, we're still doing okay. You know, like we haven't. I think we haven't like grown, but we're sitting at the same where we were last year. But I guess it's in a way it's similar to. I guess it's just business in general, you know. You gotta adapt or die, you know. Even through COVID and stuff, we got given with a unique situation that we either had to adapt to, or we would have to close the doors and shut it off. And it's the same with I guess what we're moving into now. It's, you know, is your business model going to take you through to you know, a recession, or will you have to change a few things and stuff like that? So in that respect, it's, you know, it's you know, out of the frying pan into the fire. And I don't say not negatively at all. Like, it's exciting, you know, it's challenging. It makes you, you know, keeps the creative juices flowing. So yeah, I feel like God's been very, very good to me and to me and Vic and to the business as well. I definitely feel that, you know, firstly, everything's happened for a reason the way that it has, and I think that he's you know, made the path a lot clearer than, you know, sometimes we think it is, or, you know, like, and even if we don't really know 100%, but we just have that feeling that it's the right thing to do. You know, it's comforting to know that I can, you know, trust that feeling, and you know, and hopefully it all works out. And if it doesn't, you know, that's part of the plan as well. And that was again the thing going into doing what we did with everything during COVID, and that was, you know, like, you know, it's, if this is the plan, then this is the plan. If, you know, if it's deemed that we close down and we lose everything, then that's part of the plan as well. And, you know, it's not the end of the world, essentially.
We kind of sorry, can I jump in?
I was going to get you to close off with a question, with our famous question.
I got to point something out though, very
quickly.
Oh no,
go ahead. Yeah. That's fine.
I found that was the experience, bro. You know, people who took that leap of faith and said, okay, I know what's right, and I'm gonna do what's right, and whatever comes. Man, those people didn't starve. They didn't lose their houses. They didn't die. You know, look, I'm talking about my personal experience, about seeing not only from my church but from my family, even people who were unbelievers. You know, who just said, look, this is wrong. You know, they didn't die. You know, like, there was this real fear that was instilled in people. It's like, if we don't do this, you're letting society down, you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose everything. Even in some cases, it might have been an internal, sort of internalized fear of like, man, if I do this, the world's going to come to an end, you know? And it never did. You know, these people who, you know, speaking from my experience, who didn't get vaxxed, you know, yes, some of them lost their jobs, but man, within a week or two, they found other jobs. People who had businesses, who just said, no, we're going to stick it out. I know I have a family who runs a business, and they basically said to their workers, we're not going to force you to get vaxxed. If you want to get vaxxed, that's your choice, but we're not going to tell you if you're not vaxxed, you can't work here. A couple of people left their business, and then within a few months, they had some of the best workers they'd ever had. You know, so yeah,
that's that whole vax and unvax thing. We didn't really touch on that too much. I guess it wasn't the main point of tonight's discussion, and it's also another discussion of its own. And I think that whole aspect of vax and unvax, knowing some people within the medical community, those that actually either lost their jobs or are still working in it. I won't be discussing any of their names or those people there, because it's really, really hard for them, really hard, and it's been brutal. But we've got a one last question, but before we do, what is a woman? No, that's actually not the question. That's a different question for him.
You've done that every time.
I've done that so many times. It's like a dad joke now. I just want to thank you both for coming on and just spending the time talking with us. We're talking about therapy. This is actually therapy on my Fridays and Cody's, just to be able to listen to the stories, listen to you know, people's life stories, whether good or bad, and their experiences and how it's shaped them for good or for worse. And like you said, that sort of fry pan to the fire. I mean, in some respects, you know, the last sort of 3 years, nobody would have wished that upon anybody. But I can only imagine, would you agree if you said it made you stronger? The last 3 years have made you stronger people in a lot of respects? Not just business-wise, but mentally.
Without a doubt, I think, I think it really really taught us to, stick to our guns and stick to our heart, and and also, I guess, knowing that there's like the community that we build, well, not built, but the community that was around us that supported us, and just knowing that we weren't alone at all through the whole entire process. And we've made friends now that we never probably would have made. We didn't really lose a lot of people through the process, but friends in that matter. But I think it was it's kind of hard to put into words. It's very humbling to know that as much as the diversion that they tried to divert, they didn't succeed 100%.
Yeah. So I guess we usually wrap up with asking our guests a particular question, and there have been instances where people didn't really know how to answer, and that's perfectly fine as well. But I'll ask you, Caleb, what is the gospel? If someone says, what's the gospel? How would you answer?
I guess probably quite simply of sort of the definition of that, what I've always understood it is essentially the good news. And I've always had questions throughout my faith, growing, through my life, and at times I've also thought that I didn't have faith, but now I think things are quite simple and quite clear, and I think what the Bible teaches, and the way that I think that God, well, that essentially the reason for us being on earth is to love each other, and to look after it, quite simply is to look after the earth. We're caretakers of the earth, and to love each other, and we do that through the examples of of what he's showing us in the Bible, and I think there's other examples as well that aren't in the sort of the Bible, that the main sort of Bible that we have, but I think there's a lot of good things in there as well, and that's probably a whole other discussion.
Man.
We always bring this question at the end of the podcast.
It's taken me a while and I think I do accept the fact that what is in there is there's enough in there, more than enough in there for us to know how we can love God, and love each other, and look after the earth, and
Well, Jesus said, bro, I think he was asked, what are the two, or what's the most important law? What's the greatest commandment?
Summary.
Yeah, and he said, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor. And I think that's very important. I think we are custodians of the earth, absolutely. I think that we have a responsibility to do all things righteously, including taking care of the earth. I would say that the good news in and of itself is that Jesus came to pay for our sins. Jesus died on the cross so that we could believe in Him and be washed in this atonement that He provided through His sacrifice. But man, the idea that we are not to show each other God's mercy and grace through our example, and to show each other love and grace as well, I think is very important to the gospel. you know. And I also think that that how we live, you know, demonstrates that from how we, I know, from whether it be how we look after our very household to how we look after our business. And I think a conscientious Christian does do that well.
And I think you've shown that, to be fair, the times that I've dealt with you both, and obviously just hearing your story again, I think you conducted yourself to that degree through your business and the way you conducted yourself through COVID. And I think, and even for your brother as well, you know, in the face of a lot of scrutiny and name calling and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a testament for both of you and for yourself. And we just want to thank you for coming on this evening. And it's half 11 in New Zealand, so is there work tomorrow? Keep you up too late, but thank you so much.
We'll work tomorrow, but this is normal for us.
Oh, is it normal? Okay.
Yeah.
Is margarita hour? Okay.
Yeah.
I gotta say, man, you guys obviously love the truth. You know, you obviously love to you know, there are people who suppress the truth, you know, and they just go with it. And I've found almost everyone who not got their back up or fought against these rules, but everyone who was skeptical of this loves truth. They're not just rebels and stuff. They actually care about right and wrong and truth. So
we read Galatians tonight, actually, just to wrap that up. It was basically preach the truth in love.
Yeah,
that was literally in Galatians this evening after dinner. So
man, I'm sorry, like. Congratulations on the wedding. I'm sure it was a wonderful day. I'm going to ask Jace to show me some photos, man, because I really want to see how wonderful it was, and I hope it was a good ceremony. I hope there's not any restrictions anymore with regards to having gatherings and stuff. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
God bless, guys.
Thanks for having us, and all the best, and
man,
God bless.
Can you just say one more time the name of your restaurant and where we can find it?
So the restaurant's called Saint Sebastian, and you can find it in Masterton.
Yeah, man.
Apple Street in Masterton in the North Island, New Zealand.
hour and a half north of Wellington. So for all the Wellingtonians, get up there, get some food into you, and meet these two fantastic people over and out. Cool.
Over and out.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.